Hello noble ones and welcome to Metatron's Academy, the channel where we explore how to learn languages in the most fun and effective way possible. And today we are talking about the medieval period, specifically medieval English. Now this is not going to be an in-depth discussion on linguistics. I might make a dedicated video if you're interested. But today I want to answer a question. So if a medieval person, we will be able to bring them back from the past, resurrect them from the high Middle Ages specifically. And then they were exposed to modern English. How weird would modern English sound to them compared to the way they spoke in medieval English? And also, could they even understand it? Well, there are a few ways we can approach that question and give you some satisfactory answers. Of course, again, there is the linguistic path, but I don't really want to go with that. I want to give you an experience today. And by the end of this video, you will have felt how a medieval person would feel if they were to listen to modern English. Now, of course, the first thing we need to say is that, yes, there is enough difference between the way medieval English sounded, was pronounced, and the sort of vocabulary used, and the way we speak English today. So much so that communication could be very much impaired. But let's say that, we have a linguist, we have someone who joins us through this experiment, and then they are able to sort of explain how things changed, teach this medieval person, and put them in a position where they can now kind of use a basic form of modern English and they can understand what changes have happened throughout the centuries. How weird would it be to them to know that some of the things that they pronounce in a way have been completely changed? Now, to understand this, we need to kind of dive very briefly into the concept of GVS, or Great Vowel Shift. That is a sort of linguistic phenomenon that occurred in English from the, 1400s all the way up to 1700s, basically even late 18th century. And what happened is that English used to be written phonetically. Not 100%, but mostly. In the sense that a lot of words sounded the way they were written. For instance, the words moon and blood used to rhyme even as late as Shakespeare. So, mon and blood. But in the High Middle Ages, there were a lot of words, such as night, that were pronounced completely differently. The idea being that if you have an I, you pronounce it either as a E or as a The idea of pronouncing the I as a I still hadn't happened, and that will be part of one of the consequences of GVS. So what GVS does is that it changes throughout time the pronunciation of the I, which initially was pronounced as a or a E, then it turns into a, and then it turns into a I. So a word like night initially was pronounced knicht, then it became knecht, then it became knight, and then finally the K was dropped. Very last phenomenon, it's a quite recent development, linguistically speaking, and it became night. So already a medieval person will be like, why are you not pronouncing the K? But we'll get there. Now this is interesting because similar situation happens with the A sound. If you think about it, the A initially was just pronounced like a, which then became e, and then became a. So the word face would be fas, face, face. If you notice, there are some similarities to some specific accents that still exist today. For example, some Scottish, so some people in some areas of Scotland, do still pronounce the I as a, tame instead of time, or rate instead of alright. It's not just that they have a Scottish accent, it's that Scottish as an accent tends to be more conservative, linguistically speaking, compared to other accents. So basically, they're still pronouncing things the way people did in the 15th century every time they say tame. Basically, people who do that got stuck into the second stage of evolution from E to A and never got into I. This is why Scottish accents are so fascinating, because it's a way to kind of listen and jump into a time machine, if you will. But similarly, the A into A, well, it still happens in some Northern Eastern accent, like Geordie, for example, where some people do say Facebook rather than Facebook. Play instead of play. Once again, they got stuck in the second section of GVS vowel evolution. So now that we know this, how weird would the word night, once we explain it to a person, because he won't be able to recognize it, but once we explain it, how weird would it sound to them? Here's how we can know. The way we can know is by applying the same idea into an hypothetical new modern English from, say, 1,000 years in the future from now, so like in 3000, assuming, of course, that the same rules will happen again. It might not happen that way, but it still gives us a perspective. Let's have a look at the word machine and kitchen. The word machine is interesting because it's a I that we pronounce as a long E. Now let's imagine that in a couple of hundred years, just like it happened with GVS in the medieval period, E becomes A. So it's now pronounced machine. Wait another couple of hundred years and it becomes machine. For people in the future who just say machine, if they hear us say machine, they'll be like, you've got to be joking, that sounds so weird. And to us, similarly, if you hear someone saying, that's a very nice machine you've got there, like, machine? What's a machine? I think the word kitchen is even better because it's a short, probably closer to knecht, how it was pronounced. Imagine that the word kitchen, in a couple of hundred years, becomes kitchen. And then from kitchen, it becomes kitchen. Then give it another 100 years and the K is dropped. Now they pronounce it Eichen. This is my Eichen. Do you need any water? Unrecognizable. Well, this is how it would feel for a medieval person to hear the word knight from a modern sense and connect it to knecht. In fact, even the word connect, that's a great example. Connect, drop the K, necht. Now remove the other K, net. Similar to what happened to knecht. Unrecognizable? Really weird. At least for us. Same way for people in the future who speak future English, if they're used to saying net to mean connect, to them, the way we pronounce connect would be as weird as knecht is for us when we think of the word night. Mind-blowing, isn't it? I don't know if the craziest one is the dropping of the K, or if the craziest one would be the actual evolution of the vowel. Because if you think about it, now we say cat. What if people in a couple of hundred years just drop the C or the K sound and just say at? Ats and dogs. This town is full of ats and dogs. You'd be like, what the heck is a at? Why don't you pronounce it? It's a cat. It's a knecht. Now, of course, to us it sounds crazy that things could change so much in the future, but they will. We don't know if they will take this path specifically. Language history doesn't necessarily repeat itself, but it does sometimes rhyme. Still, the changes that we might see in the future or in future English could be so drastic, it would be the same. But if you paid attention, look at this one. The sounds that we pronounce as a long E, like to be, people. If you really think about it, there are already some accents, I want to say in some areas of Great Britain, in Australia as well, where the way people pronounce it, it's already starting to change towards a. You do have some people in some accents that say, what do you want to be? That's a lot of people. Those accents already happen. And it's interesting because you can still understand them. If I say people, but if someone tells me, that's a lot of people, I'll still understand them. This is probably how it sounded like when there were still in the High Middle Ages some people that were saying knecht, but then there were already some people starting to pronounce it knecht, and it probably sounded just like people and people. Different accents, still the same thing. It's just that then eventually with the new generations, and no one ever pronounced knecht anymore, and everyone was saying knecht, and the same thing happened to knecht and then night. So once again, using this as an example to give us that time-traveling feeling. People, some people say papal, some people might start saying pipal in a couple of hundred years. There's a lot of pipal in here. Now this was a little bit of a shorter video because I didn't want to go into all the linguistic details of the GVS, but if you are interested and you want me to make a full-on dedicated video on all the different aspects of GVS, because there are several, let me know and I will make a dedicated video. On the same note, if you like this kind of videos based on feelings, on how I can make you feel how a certain person of a certain period in time might have felt if they were to listen to our current rendition of their language, or pronunciation thereof, let me know, because I could make the same thing but for Latin. How weird would ecclesiastical Latin sound to an ancient Roman who spoke classical Latin, or even how weird would Italian sound, or French or Spanish? I can make dedicated videos to an ancient Roman if they were to hear those words that you can still tell are kind of similar but have received an evolution in time. If this idea intrigues you, please let me know in the comments below, and if there is any language, dead language, modern language, that you wish me to dive into, maybe talk in a comparative level, on a comparative key, feel free to let me know in the comments below. And as usual, thank you very much for joining Metatron's Academy.